This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken, in for Catherine Shen. You might recognize my voice from another Connecticut Public show, Seasoned. From 2020 and until season ended this month, I got to talk to farmers and food makers in Connecticut and beyond. I also got to interview well-known chefs and food writers about their cookbooks. You'll hear 2 of those conversations this hour. Later in the show, you'll meet Marissa Mendez-Marthaler. She's a certified postpartum doula. She's worked in the hospitality industry and has a degree in food studies. Those interests and passions come together in her business. Marissa is known as the soup doula in New York City. I talk with Marissa about her work and the healing power of soup. But first, you certainly know my first guest if you're a home cook or you're someone who's learned how to cook by watching YouTube. Sohla El-Waylly is a culinary creator, writer, and YouTube star. Sohla's been featured in the New York Times and Bon Appetit and on websites like Food 52 and Serious Eats. When we spoke, she was also a brand new mom. She joined me on Zoom to talk about the second most important thing she's brought into the world. Her cookbook is called Start Here: Instructions for Becoming a Better Cook. Now you're going to hear some parenting in real time here. There are dogs barking and doorbells buzzing. Plus, Sohla's doing the double duty of being a caretaker and a human baby swing.
We're multitasking here.
Yes. So I know that you're not a coffee person, but you are a breakfast person. So what did you have for breakfast today?
Oh, okay. New update. Ever since having a child, I'm a coffee person, and I don't have time for breakfast. So I've only had coffee today.
So, listen, part of your multitasking today can be that you are going to eat while we talk. It's totally fine if you want to shove something in your face.
Okay. It's so easy to just, forget to take care of yourself when you have a baby.
I know.
Uh-oh. I'm so sorry. We'll try this position. All right. I'm good. We're good.
It's an honor and a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
So I realized that there's some irony in calling your book Culinary School Between Two Covers, because you do view your time at the Culinary Institute of America as a huge waste of money. Talk a little bit about how you came to that conclusion.
Well, what I didn't understand before going to culinary school is that so much about learning how to cook is just practice and muscle memory. And in culinary school, I feel like when I went, it was very overcrowded. They were really stretching. It just felt like they were trying to squeeze as much profit out of each student as possible. So we were packed in these tight classrooms where none of us could really have access to a lot of ingredients. We were sharing, I had to cook 1 lamb rack between 2 people. We had to butcher 1 chicken between 2 people. Over an entire 3-week seafood course, I opened 1 clam. 1 clam! Whoops. So I guess I wish I realized that before going in and devoted that time and money to just getting things in my own kitchen and just practicing as much as possible, or just immediately going to work. If you want to get into a restaurant, you don't need culinary school. Just get in there and start prepping, because so much of it is just practice. But I do appreciate that in culinary school, I met my husband. So,
yes.
That worked out. It's a great, dating app,
Yes. Especially if maybe it's the 2 of you who get the 1 chicken that you have to learn how to take apart.
Oh, so romantic, right?
So I used to work at a food magazine. I was the web editor at Fine Cooking in the early aughts. And I was the only editor on staff who didn't go to culinary school.
Oh.
Yeah, during tastings in the test kitchen, the other editors were really interested in my opinion about how recipes turned out. And they'd say, Robyn, what does a normal person think of this dish or that dish? And so not going to culinary school made me a, quote, normal person, whereas I thought that it actually put me at a disadvantage around that table. But your strong opinion about culinary school actually reaffirmed for me that being a curious home cook who racks up lots of failures has its own value too.
Yes. And also, I feel like this is true for when you're going to school for any kind of creative line of work. sometimes it makes you a little bit rigid. Culinary school is very European focused in terms of how they teach you. And then you're kind of left feeling like the foundation of food has to be French. And I definitely don't agree with that. And I think that by learning on your own, you might be a bit more open-minded and more open to other cuisines.
Yeah. How has failing made you a better cook? Because you talk in the book a lot about how you're going to fail and that's okay. Everything is a learning opportunity.
It was really important for me to make sure everyone understands that, because you see so many people online, on TV, cooking perfect food, and they worked a long way to get to that point. So I want you to know that everyone started out exactly like you. Everyone started out terribly. Even someone like Gordon Ramsay, who seems like he can do everything. In the beginning, he was bad. So I want to make sure everyone understands that it's all about putting in the work and, putting in your reps. It's just like working out. You got to just practice. And I feel like by failing, the more times I fail, the more like confident I get, because I've always come back. I've always pulled myself through whatever terrible dish or, sometimes bigger life failures like closing a restaurant. I know that I can get through anything because I've already done it.
I love a good chef origin story, and lots of them begin in the same way. People say, I learned to cook at my grandmother's or my mother's elbow, that sort of thing. And you did learn lots about cooking from your mom, because by all accounts, she's a great home cook. But sort of getting to what you were just talking about, your family didn't support your dream of becoming a professional chef and owning your own restaurant. And I really admire how you've forged your own path. And I know it wasn't easy.
No, I come from a very conservative, traditional Bangladeshi family. So they just wanted me to be either a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. I know that you've heard that like trope before, but it's very true. Because they came here, they made a big risk to come to this country, and they gave up on a lot of what they built. Like my dad had a master's degree, and when he came to the US, it was basically worthless, and he had to start by working in a gas station. So I understand their fears. Like they came here, they made all these sacrifices so that we could have an easier life. So for them to see me choosing to work in a kitchen, choosing to my first job was as a dishwasher. I see why that's really hard for them. And I understand it even more now that I have a child, but I just knew I wanted to do it. And I'm really glad that I believed in myself and pushed through, because there were a lot of times where I wanted to give up, because it is very hard line of work, but I loved it. And I think they now understand that what they got me by coming here was the freedom to pursue a career that I love.
For whatever reason, I've met many former lawyers who are now cooks. So I wonder, what do you say to people who are kind of in that spot where they're not doing the thing that they're meant to do and they know they're meant to maybe cook or something different?
I really believe that you should go for it. Even if you try and fail, I think it's better to just try. And I don't know, you get one life, and I don't think that it needs to be stuck in one career just because you made a choice it is a little bit crazy that we expect 18-year-olds to pick a major and stick with it and know exactly what they want to do their whole life. Like, life is long, and you can have a lot of different careers within one life, and I think you should just go for it. And it's going to be really, really rough in the beginning, but you have to push through the hump, and you'll get there. Or you won't, and it's fine, and you can go back to being a lawyer. No big deal.
So for listeners who don't have your book yet, can you describe its structure? Because I think it's pretty unique in this way.
Well, it's really focused on technique. So each chapter goes deep into one technique. I teach you everything about it, and then the recipes are there to help you further understand that technique by cooking through them. Of course, there's a ton of easy weeknight recipe ideas in there as well if you just are looking for something to cook. But I really wanted to teach you how to understand these techniques in your bones so that they feel like intuition. Because the idea is you read through this book and you'll be able to cook any other recipe better, because these are universal techniques that'll help you no matter what you're making.
I thought it was interesting that Samin Nosrat wrote your foreword for the book, because there hasn't been a book this comprehensive in terms of teaching cooking since probably Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat.
Okay, I was so nervous to ask her. I initially just asked her for a blurb, and then she wanted to write the foreword. So for me, that was such a big deal because I admire her so much. not just because of writing an amazing cookbook, but being a woman of color and representing women of color in such an amazing way. So that was really cool and surreal. And I still have to like remind myself like, whoa, you know, Samin Nosrat.
I know, it is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You have a great musical metaphor in the book about building up the skills for both savory and sweet cooking, so pastries and desserty things. Talk about why a home cook should really lean into both.
They are very different. I feel like it's almost like left brain, right brain. With pastry, there's so much precision. You really can't like go off script. And with savory, you can figure things out as you're going and you can make lots of substitutions. And I think that when you can do both, you can really, really have fun. And I like to bring a lot of pastry elements into my savory cooking and vice versa. And I think it teaches you a lot about seasoning as well, understanding your palate. Like one big thing that I think everybody knows is that all desserts are better with a pinch of salt. But I don't think people realize it goes the other way. Like all savory food is more balanced and rounded when you add a pinch of sugar. But besides that, the techniques really overlap. Like when you understand how to slow down and be precise with pastry, you can apply that to your savory cooking. The best cooks can do both. And I think we need to like let go of this binary of being like one or the other.
Is there a recipe from the book that you would point to that is a great example of adding some of that sweet into the savory that makes the savory better?
Oh, okay. There's this Bistia-inspired pie. I say it's Bistia-inspired because the Bistia is where you traditionally you stew poultry down for a long time. And it has some warm spices in there like cinnamon, black pepper, and then that meat gets shredded, often combined with like some scrambled eggs. It gets folded up in phyllo dough, and then you finish it with powdered sugar and cinnamon. And I know that sounds crazy, but the sweet and savory really works very well. And my shortcut is I use ground chicken, browned very, very deeply to kind of mimic that long cooked Maillard reaction flavor that you get from a braise. And I think it's a great way to see how you can add some sweet to savory and also use those warm spices in a savory application. You see it a lot in non-Western cuisines, but in Western food, you usually just see like cinnamon in desserts. But I think cinnamon is a great thing to use for savory cooking as well.
Oh, me too. I love in a bolognese.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, if there's cinnamon or a little nutmeg, when I taste that in a bolognese, I feel like somebody really knew what they were doing.
Yeah. It makes such a big difference.
My daughter is 20, and soon I'm going to help her set up a kitchen in a student apartment. I was relieved to hear you say in an interview that new cooks don't need much to get started and almost nothing that plugs in. So what do you consider the essential tools for beginner cooks?
Okay, so you got to get a nice big cutting board. The biggest one that you can fit in your kitchen. You can't have too much cutting board space. It's a great place to prep, and you'll also notice that when you have a bigger cutting board, it's just easier to execute the knife skills. Get a knife you can sharpen, so it doesn't have to be the fanciest knife, but all knives are good if they're sharp, and all knives will get dull. So if you're not ready to like dedicate yourself to sharpening with a whetstone, that's totally fine. You can use one of those like handheld roller sharpeners, but then go for like an easy, inexpensive knife. Really, whatever you can pick up at Target will be fine. And I love a cast iron skillet. I use it for most things. I recommend just like a Lodge 10-inch skillet. It's $20 and it'll last you forever. But you do have to, just read the section on how to season a cast iron skillet. It's easier than you think. And you're going to love it. Once you get into the routine of seasoning it, you'll be fine. And then you need a pot. I love a Dutch oven, but I know that can be price commitment. Sorry, now there's a dog. Wow. We got dogs, we got buzzers, we got babies.
This seems like the perfect time to take a quick break. Coming up, more with Sohla El-Waylly, including tips for baking and making caramel.
You want to make sure you set yourself up so that you're not multitasking while hot sugar is on the stove. So I like to make sure there's no dogs or babies around.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken. Are you a fan of Sohla's, or are you cooking from her book right now? We want to hear from you. You can join the conversation on Facebook and X at Where We Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken, in for Catherine Shen. Later in the show, you'll meet the soup doula. She's a postpartum doula who makes soup for new parents. But right now, let's get back to my first guest, Sohla El-Waylly. You know her from the New York Times and her YouTube and Instagram cooking videos. Sohla's first cookbook is Start Here: Instructions for Becoming a Better Cook. Sohla, actually, could use a soup doula. She chased her dogs around the apartment and rocked her daughter as we talked about the essentials my daughter needs for her little kitchen at college.
Ooh, and if you're getting a sheet pan, try and get a matching wire rack to rest inside of it, because it's perfect for roasting meat. I don't actually really use a roasting dish ever. I just sheet pan with a wire rack. Does a better job because you get more air circulation, so you get better browning all around whatever you're roasting.
Yeah, good idea. Aside from all the excellent cooking how-to, I loved how there was a lot of good info in your book about how to take proper care of the things that we use every day to cook. So like the cutting boards, the knives, the cast iron skillets. What do we need to know about caring for these essentials in a way that will help them last like 10 or 20 years or even a lifetime in the case of the skillet?
Most of the things you buy will last you a lifetime, especially if you avoid Teflon. Teflon's really the only thing that no matter what you do will not last because it inevitably gets scratched up and you have to replace it. Cutting board, the main thing to remember is every month, set an alert in your calendar. I just do it when it's time to pay the bills. You want to oil it up. Get some mineral oil. You can get a gallon of it. That's what I do. I have a gallon of it, and then cover your cutting board, all sides, top, bottom, and anything that you have that has a wooden, like any other wooden tools you have. So like rolling pin, wooden spoon, offset spatula with the wooden handle, coat everything in oil and it will last forever. Coating it in oil will prevent the moisture, like water, from getting in there and causing it to mold or warp or crack. It's just like putting lotion on your skin. You know, you want it to stay really nice and hydrated, but if you moisturize your wooden tools, they will literally last you forever. And don't put wooden tools in the dishwasher. Sometimes I forget and I'll throw a spatula in there with a wooden handle. Really dries it out. But even if you do that, if you oil it up, it'll come back to you. It will come back.
Oh, that's a good tip. And I want to say, too, about the knives. If you don't know how to sharpen your own knife, it's totally fine. A lot of grocery stores, like Whole Foods, even hardware stores, when you can go to the hardware store to get that large cast iron pan, and while you're there, bring your collection of knives and see if the hardware store will sharpen them for you.
Absolutely. As a home cook, you really only have to do it twice a year. Since I cook professionally, I have to do it more often than that, but twice a year is plenty. You'll have really sharp knives and it will make your knife skills better. You'll cut things faster and you're less likely to cut yourself.
A dull knife is a dangerous knife.
Yes, it's something I still can't convince my mom. My mom loves her dull knives. She's afraid of a sharp knife. But you know what? She's an amazing cook, so she's got a system.
An entire half of this massive book, and it is massive, is devoted to baking. So thank you for that. But you cop to being an under-mixer in the butter chapter. So say more about that. And then I'd be curious to know what common baking problems new cooks ask you about. So like what are the universal baking problems that newbies run into? And maybe that's the stuff you cover in the, quote, what the hell happened sidebars.
Okay, I always undermixed, but I think when it comes to baking, there's always this fear of gluten. Gluten is what happens when flour mixes with water and the proteins, they link up and they make bread chewy, but they're also really important in pastry. It's what makes pie crust flaky. So you're not always trying to have the least amount of gluten possible in a pastry. That's like, it's not a rule that applies generally. I like to teach people more about how much you have to mix each thing. So I go through 3 major mixing methods. When I first started baking, I was just terrified of gluten. But gluten is really vital to the structure of all of these things that we love. That's why it's so hard to make certain things gluten-free. And the most common baking errors, which I get a lot of feedback on recipes online, and I hate to break it to people, but I think where people are sabotaging themselves is by not using a scale. Because a lot of the problems people have reached out to me about, like maybe a cookie's too dry or a cake is too wet, it's really just proper measuring. You can never measure that accurately without a scale.
Right, because your vessel for 1 cup is going to be different than my vessel for 1 cup, even though we're both measuring a cup.
Yes, and then internationally, a cup is different. Australia's cup's different from the US cup. And then every recipe developer has different conversions for what 1 cup of flour is. So it's really impossible to be accurate. I think you should go for that scale. It will last you forever.
Yeah, and it's like $5 on Amazon.
Absolutely. We have so much tech. We'll get a scale.
One thing that new cooks, and even seasoned cooks actually, find very intimidating is making caramel.
Uh-huh.
You have a story about this. What is the safest way for us to make caramel?
Well, so when I was a kid, I loved making caramel because I grew up in an ingredient household, so we had no snacks, no sweets. So I would nuke sugar in the microwave with some nuts to make a little praline. Very dangerous. Definitely don't do it. It ended with a glass dish exploding all over me, and like the pieces of glass got embedded into my arms because of the hot sugar. That's not the way to do it. I think it's very important whenever you're cooking with sugar. That's when mise en place really matters. Mise en place doesn't matter with all cooking, but with caramel, you want to make sure you set yourself up so that you're not multitasking while hot sugar is on the stove. So get whatever tools you need, what other ingredients you need for the next steps. Have everything set up before you start cooking your sugar. I like to make sure there's no dogs or babies around. Make sure there's no distractions, and really just like pay attention to what you're doing, because sugar burns are so painful and pretty dangerous. So just stay focused and set yourself up.
So could I ask a question about some of your TV stuff, your video stuff?
Totally.
We love to explore where our food comes from. And sometimes that's a local farm, but sometimes it's more of a country or a culinary heritage or a point in history. That's why I just think your digital series with the History Channel, Ancient Recipes with Sohla, is so special. You pack so much history into 20 minutes, and you've dispelled food myths about everything from how Jesus' Last Supper maybe would have gone down to the first Thanksgiving. So I'm curious to know if you have like a team of 20 historians working with you, how you plan those episodes out.
There is a team, not 20 historians. Maybe one day we'll have the budget for that. We have 1 historian. It's a relatively small team. The showrunner also writes the scripts. And it's like we kind of all work together. I am more of like the culinary side. The historian double checks the history, and then the showrunner makes the flow of the episode work. So it's definitely a team effort. And it's really fun because there's something nice about being on a small team where everybody is hustling. That show is one of the funnest things that I do because it is. We shoot 3 a day with a very small team. So everyone's sweating at the end of the day. And that's exactly how I like it.
You learned to cook from watching, cooking shows on TV, PBS, Martha Stewart, that kind of stuff. Well, it was one of the ways you learned how to cook. Has it hit you yet that you are someone's Martha Stewart? Yeah, you on YouTube, you are doing that same thing for someone else.
No, definitely not. I can't think about things like that. It scares me. In my mind, I'm just hanging out in the kitchen with my friend.
I so appreciate you. I know you are super busy. You've got dogs and a baby and a very busy life in New York City, so I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I hope that you are able to take a breath, enjoy the success of your book, and everything that's next for you.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this was entertaining, watching me try and swing a baby while talking.
Even though your day didn't work out the way you'd planned, you still spent some time with me, and I so appreciate it.
Cool. Also, she just pooped. Great timing. I'm gonna go deal with that now.
Thank you, Sohla.
Thank you.
That was Sohla El-Waylly, culinary creator, writer, and YouTube star. She's also a new mom. Her cookbook is Start Here: Instructions for Becoming a Better Cook. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Where We Live. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken, in for Catherine Shen. You can cook from Sohla's book. She's sharing recipe excerpts for a crispy-skinned salmon and a charred lemon risotto. Doesn't that sound good? They'll be linked up on our show page, ctpublic.org/wherewelive. Next up, the soup doula.
Showing up with soup for somebody is really a way of caring for them so they can care for themselves, so they can care for their baby, and I think it's really important.
You can join the conversation on Facebook and X at Where We Live. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Where We Live on Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken, in for Catherine Shen. We all love when somebody shows up at the house with soup. And for postpartum people, that soup is a lifeline.
My name is Marissa Mendez-Marthaler, and I am a certified lactation counselor and postpartum doula, and I'm also the soup doula.
Most people have heard the term doula before, but for people who might not know what a postpartum doula is, can you explain? Because it's a very specific practice, and there are some common misconceptions and associations with the term postpartum. So help us understand.
So a postpartum doula is a doula who helps birthing people and families through the postpartum period. And that help and support can look like many different things, and oftentimes is kind of a generalized sort of support that can include food, cooking food for families. It could include helping families with sleep. It can include lactation assistance, support with siblings. It can also, include basic like newborn care, kind of teaching, and a lot of resourcing for families. Like a doula has a lot of knowledge and resources in the community so they can connect their families with organizations or people who may be helpful during that time. The postpartum doula comes after the baby is born, generally speaking, and then helps the family through the first few weeks of postpartum. And to your point, postpartum is a word that often gets kind of confused in our dialogue, I think, in our cultural American dialogue, because when we talk about postpartum, we often talk about it in terms of only like mental health, especially with depression. I find that a lot of people understand that in terms of they think that I am working with postpartum people or people who have depression, which is a huge misconception because what postpartum means literally is post-birth. So anybody who has given birth has a postpartum period. And what that postpartum period looks like is many different things, depending on what your support system looks like. So postpartum is the entire period after birth, and postpartum doulas are there to support people through the postpartum period.
What inspired you to show up for the families who are in the postpartum period through food, with soup?
I think that my inspiration developed over a few years. My initial inspiration came from my own experience being postpartum. After my son was born, I live in Brooklyn and I have worked in restaurants for many, many, many years. And a lot of my community also are folks who have worked in the restaurant industry. I have a very expansive community, and my identity, my identity as part of the LGBTQ community and Mexican American, is two concentric circles in many communities that I'm a part of. So I use community in a pretty expansive sense because I also have a professional community. I have a New York community. I have the birthing community, and so I guess I think of community as all of that human networking and all of those concentric circles together. We were very lucky, my partner and I, to receive a meal train, and people brought us a lot of food, and it was such a huge support for us during that time that it really made me think about supporting people during the postpartum period. And then a couple years into my time being a postpartum doula, I'm going into my 7th year, the pandemic started. And for me, that experience as a doula meant that I couldn't be with my families in person, whether it was in the hospital or whether it was in their homes. And so one of the ways that I could help them was to send them food, and particularly soup, because soup is a very healing postpartum food. So I started sending my families a lot of soup during the pandemic.
It's the quintessential comfort food.
It is. I think part of the comfort of soup is that it is easy. When you are tired and when you are learning how to parent and when you are learning how to feed a baby, you're kind of in this other zone, you're in this other world, and it's really challenging. And so getting really high quality nutrients, sometimes for a lot of families that I work with, really takes a back burner, I think that a lot of people, are just trying to get through the day often in the postpartum time. And so they may grab something like a sandwich or a toast, or you're eating things just to kind of get calories so you can keep up this marathon of newborn parenting. Soup really is like magic because it comes in and it gives your body what it needs nutrient wise. And it's also going back to the comfort thing. It's also super comforting.
I was remembering my own postpartum time, and sometimes a hot bowl of soup might have been the only hot meal I had that day, because there is so much work involved in the care of a newborn that, it really does feel like this easy thing that you can get down, and it can also be maybe your only hot meal that day.
Yeah, absolutely. And if that only hot meal that you can have is also going to give you, really high quality, vegetable nutrients and fats and the protein and all of the things, you're gonna be sustained. Soup can sustain you. It can also sustain your whole family. It's important everybody is getting enough food and getting enough rest. And, soup you can divide up between 2 bowls. You can divide it up between 3 bowls. It's amazing.
And super hydrating too. I found as a breastfeeding mom, I was thirsty all the time.
It's true. And staying hydrated is extremely important for lactating people, extremely important. And for recovery as well during the postpartum period, because your body is shifting this major hormonal shift during that time. And also you are getting rid of all the excess water that you hold on during pregnancy. So staying really hydrated really helps that transition of hormonal smoothness, lactation, and soup helps to keep you hydrated and keep you stocked with nutrients as well.
Mm-hmm. The connection might not be obvious at first, but labor is a thing that applies to life-giving and cooking. So there's labor in both. It's part of what makes soup such a gift to people who receive it. Can you talk about labor in the context of caring for people after they give birth or during a significant transition?
Yes. One of the things that really struck me in my own postpartum period was, people were bringing us food, and I was really struck by how much labor is involved in preparing food. We often take it for granted when we have time to do it, or when we get convenience foods, or, you go to a restaurant. But there's so much labor that's involved in preparing whole foods that, when somebody brings you soup, and especially high quality soup that has been cooked from whole foods and by hand, there's a significant amount of labor that goes into that soup.
Yeah, one of the things I remember you saying was that the postpartum period is a really tender time. It's physically tender. Mm-hmm. You are sore. And your body can focus on all the healing that it has to do because you're not also doing all of the tasks of, feeding people and cooking, and all of that labor of cooking is now taken away so that your body can focus on its healing because it is a tender time.
Yeah. I think the postpartum time is an extremely tender time. It's important for your body to be able to assimilate the food that you eat, and soup is easily digestible, so your body doesn't have to do like a lot of work doing the digesting. Your soup kind of like welcome the nutrients into your body and then focus on repairing maybe like surgical incisions or like tears or the soreness of your muscles. But also it's an emotionally tender time. You are having every feeling totally normal during the postpartum period. And, you're like going through this like wild oxytocin ride, falling in love with a baby, and your identity is shifting in real time. And so I think that emotionally, it's also like a really tender time. And, having foods that feed you, your body, but also feed you emotionally and just kind of like support you through that time is very important.
You've been a food lover for a very long time, and I know that all of your work, and just life in general, is experienced through the lens of food. Are there soups from your own cultural heritage, or maybe from the cuisines of friends or clients, that you find especially comforting and nourishing? So, do you have go-tos?
Yes. I am Mexican-American, and in Mexico, we have a lot of soups that are really brothy. Like, one of my favorites is like a brothy chicken soup, caldo. There's something that is so healing about a really simple chicken broth with like pieces of chicken and herbs and vegetables in it. Like, I love that, and all like the different variations that are available. Pozole is one of my favorite soups, like a really brothy soup with like a chili sauce and hominy and, sometimes pork, chicken. It can be vegetarian, whatever. I feel like a brothy thing is the thing that really just like gets into your cells and like transmits the healing and the nutrients. In the postpartum space, there is a lot of different soups. Like each culture has kind of a different soup that is specific to postpartum period. Khichdi is one. It's a South Asian kind of like a stew or like a porridge of basmati rice and often lentils or mung dal with digestive spices like turmeric and cumin, ginger, things that are like really easy for your body to assimilate and digest.
And that's Khichdi with a K, in case anyone wants to look it up on Google to find a good recipe.
Mm-hmm. And there is multiple spellings of Khichdi.
Oh, really?
So,
I didn't know.
Yeah, Khichdi, yeah. So you can kind of go down a whole postpartum Khichdi learning well of information. I also often do congee, rice porridge. There's a lot of like rice porridges in Chinese and also Korean culture. Korean culture also does a wonderful seaweed soup that I make sometimes, which is really beautiful and nourishing and salty and delicious. And the postpartum soup in Korea that is always brought to a new birthing parent.
You mentioned pozole earlier, and that's my favorite soup of all time.
Really?
Yes, because I love hominy. For people who don't know, it's made from dried corn, and it has a corn flavor, but hominy has like the vibe of a soft chickpea or like a quenelle beans. And pozole is one of those soups that can take hours and lots of labor if you're doing it right. But flavor and texture-wise, it's so worth it because it's limey, and I love a limey soup. So it's bright, and it's garnished with shredded lettuce often and radishes. So even though it's meaty, brothy soup, it's also got a lot of textures going on.
Like the garnishes is kind of like everybody can have their own. So sometimes like if you're having a bunch of people and you're eating pozole together, you're going to have a plate with like the limes and the onions and the oregano and the lettuce, or, there's a whole thing like the lettuce versus the cabbage team of pozole, and maybe like tostadas or flautas, like, you get all this crunchy, fresh vegetable and then some sort of fried tortilla deliciousness on the side as well. Pozole is a great soup.
Especially if we're lucky enough to be loved with soup deliveries during a birth or a death or some other major life transition. Are there tips that you might be able to give for freezing soup? How do you freeze different types of soup?
Most soups freeze well. That's the good news. Soups that have dairy in them, sometimes the dairy separates and gets a little strange with the texture. So they don't tend to freeze as well, but I think that portioning the soup out into 16-ounce or 32-ounce containers, depending on the size of your family. If you're eating alone, you can get like a 16-ounce container. They have those soup cubes, which are really cool. They're like the silicone cubes that you can pre-portion your soup out to. You can freeze it for up to 3 months and pretty much it'll be like exactly the same. And then it'll last longer than that as well. Make sure you label it. That's very important because otherwise you're going to be digging around. If you can remember, just take it out of the freezer a couple of days before you want to eat it and put it into the refrigerator so it's ready when you're ready to go.
What sort of feedback do you get from your new families? What does it mean to them that you're helping them through this period, and one of the ways that you do that is with soup?
It kind of goes back to that labor of making food again. Like you can taste the amount of labor in the food when it's full of vegetables and there's a good depth of flavor in the soup broth. And so I think people are really thankful because they're busy and they want to eat well and take care of themselves, and they want to eat well and take care of their families. The soup arriving and being able to just be heated and eaten. I think people who are new parents and they have a new perspective on labor, the labor of birth, the labor of just life, they really appreciate that time-saving gesture and feeling like they're getting something that's really good for them.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you and really highlight what you do is because I am a mom, I'm a parent, and I had my first postpartum period 20 years ago. I still remember the vegetable soup that showed up in a big pot. A coworker of my husband's showed up with vegetable soup, and still to this day, it is the absolute best vegetable soup I ever had. I can't remember all of the exact ingredients. I know it was delicious, but it also was so needed. During this period, sitting down, making 5 minutes to heat up and have a hot bowl of soup might be the only thing that you do for yourself in that day, because so much of being a new parent is giving. And it meant so much to me that 20 years later, I still remember it. And I could even cry when I think about this soup and what a lifesaver it was, and how I looked forward to it. After that first bowl, I knew it was coming again. And I knew the next day, oh, that's what I'm going to have for lunch. I'm going to be able to eat this soup. And it really it meant so much to me. And so I admire what you do, because I think that your work is so important, and it is the way that you show up for people. Yeah, and I think people are lucky when they get to have a bowl of soup that someone else has made for them, and it really it means so much more than just the food.
I think so too, and we're very social creatures. We are designed to show up for each other and to support each other, and especially in the childbirth time. Showing up with soup for somebody is really a way of caring for them so they can care for themselves, so they can care for their baby and their family. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I wanted to say too, or I wanted to bring up this idea and see what your thoughts are. We don't really live in a culture that values the postpartum period as a time of healing. Having maternity leave, first of all, is a luxury. And not everyone has it. But also during that time, it's sort of you're counting the seconds that you might have to be getting back to work and all of that. So our culture doesn't necessarily think about this as a very tender time, but you do.
Yeah, I totally agree that our culture does not think about the postpartum period as a tender time. I mean, clearly some people do. There's a lot of people who do. But like you said, it's a luxury to have access to parental leave. We have huge medical gaps in our postpartum care for birthing people. We also have huge gaps in parental leave compared to other high-income countries. The United States is constantly winning at being the lowest ranking of countries that offer good quality postpartum care. The expectation that people should be going back to work, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks after they give birth is really kind of setting up a dialogue or a conversation that really collapses the real conversation that we should be having about how to support people, how to support families through this time so they can heal and be strong, healthy individuals, parents, partners, community members. Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of people who are having the conversation about how to support birthing people and birthing families through the time, all the doulas out there. But generally speaking, there is a big gap, and a lot of people experience that in very real ways during the postpartum period. They really experience that lack of support.
You consider yourself an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community. How does your allyship and your community inform the work that you do? Sort of knowing how some of these disparities exist in our current system.
When you're starting with a system that is already lacking maternity care for people who are in the LGBTQ community, the system is not even built for them. And so I think that myself, with the work that I'm doing with food and with my doula work, and doulas in general, are really able to hold space for people, hold space for our birthing families that may not be seen by the system, and be able to create support within those spaces, because the system is not necessarily set up to support, LGBTQ families. And so I feel like, what I'm doing over here in my little soup corner and in my postpartum work is really to hold that space for families and be somebody who can show up and do the work of supporting families in however they need.
Marissa, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing the ways that you are loving people with soup. And I love that you make a difference in the world in the really specific way that you can. I admire what you do and your mission around feeding and comforting your community. Thank you so much for talking with me.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been really great.
That was Marissa Mendez-Marthaler, a certified postpartum doula. She's worked in the hospitality industry and has a degree in food studies. She's the soup doula in New York City, and her website is soupdoula.co, or just search Soup Doula online. You can join the conversation anytime, all the time, on Facebook and X. We're at Where We Live. Thanks to my guests, chef and cookbook author Sohla El-Waylly and doula Marissa Mendez-Marthaler. You'll find links to their work and 2 recipes from Sohla's book on our website, ctpublic.org/Where We Live. I'm Robyn Doyon-Aitken. Today's show was produced by me, Tess Terrible, and Meg Dalton, with help from Stephanie Stender. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening, everybody.